Hey everyone, it's Joe Devlin, MMA Fight Night Live. Wanted to do a little bit of a UFC 251 recap video. Big event went down last Saturday. Not sure if you guys have seen the numbers yet, but The Athletic is reporting that the event sold 1.3 million pay-per-views, which would make it the uh, biggest event since Khabib and Conor back in 2018. So if those numbers are true, that's a big win for the UFC. It's also kind of a telltale sign of how big of a star Jorge Masvidal has become in the organization. What I want to do is kind of do a recap of just the pay-per-view portion, main event down, and go over kind of some of the finer points of the fights, general thoughts, and then kind of next steps for some of the participants. So we'll start at the top with the Kamaru Usman Jorge Masvidal fight. Obviously, not what most fans wanted to see, but if you were one of the 20 people that watched myself and Nick's preview of UFC 21 251, sorry, my throat's gone. You'll know that I stated that I thought that the Gilbert Burns fight was going to be a very interesting fight, a very competitive fight, because Usman wouldn't be able to rely solely on his grappling and on his wrestling. Gilbert Burns has the strength to keep Kamaru off of him, and I think would have been better prepared to be able to do so for 5 rounds, forcing Kamaru into more of a kickboxing fight. As soon as they made the switch of opponents, I know everyone generally was happier because Jorge Masvidal, right? Who doesn't want to watch him fight? And I agree. But I thought that the matchup was poor, especially on short notice. I know that Dustin Poirier was out there saying that Jorge was training with world-class wrestlers, and in fact he was. He had Bo Nichols out with him, a couple other guys. But again, Kamaru Usman on 6 days, even if you have been training, you haven't been training hard. It was a big ask. A lot of people I've seen are really shitting on Kamaru, and I don't think that's really fair. Um, if I'm Kamaru and I had that opponent switch at the last minute, I wouldn't want to take any risk myself. I'd be more apt to going right to my fundamentals, going right into my wrestling, trying to win the fight that way. If I'm being honest, I would put more blame on Jorge. The first 2 rounds were somewhat competitive, but I found early to midway through round three, once Kamaru got him up against the cage and started just landing like 1,000 foot stomps, Jorge just seemed to just stand there and take it. And then that happened in round four and round five. I didn't see any urgency from him to improve his situation so that he could kind of get back into the middle of the ring and do what he does best. So, I thought at first maybe he was conserving energy, being that it was a 6 day notice fight. But once you got into like the late fourth round, you kind of knew what the deal was, and this was going to kind of be the way that the entire fight was going to play out. So, overall, it wasn't an exciting fight, but I think it was somewhat predictable given the styles of the two opponents. That being said, Dana White mentioned after the fight that he's going to be booking Gilbert Burns against Kamaru Usman, which I think is the right move to make. I think that of that top 10 in the welterweight division, I actually believe Gilbert Burns poses the biggest threat to Usman. If Usman gets past Burns, and especially if he steamrolls Burns, I'm not quite sure who's going to be the guy to take him out. But needless to say, I think that will be a much better fight. And then when you look at a guy like Jorge, obviously his star power is there, but do you want to kind of give him to the number one, number two, number three competitors in that weight class? You want to have him fight like a Leon Edwards or a Colby Covington. Those are the two names floating around. And I mean, I don't love either of those fights for him. I think the Colby fight would play out similarishly. Jesus, can't say that word. To the way that the Usman fight did, in that he's up against a real pressure fighter. I think Colby would be more willing to swing with him. But at the end of the day, I think it would just be pressure forward. And I think the Leon Edwards fight would be fine. But if Leon couldn't get a big name to fight him before the Usman fight got booked, when he was kind of out there calling for that shot, good luck trying to get a guy like Jorge to take that fight now. So I think with the UFC and their handling of Jorge, I'd really like to see them kind of try and push that Conor McGregor fight again. I think it makes sense for both guys. I think it would sell a shit ton of pay-per-views. It doesn't upset the apple cart and the balance in either the lightweight or the welterweight division. I know some people out there are kind of angling for like that Nate Diaz rematch, which I don't get. The first fight wasn't competitive at all. If they made it again, I mean, sure, I'd watch it, but do I expect it to be like that much better. Not really. Um, so, Masvidal, I think, is still in a bit of a position of power, even coming off of a loss. I think that his drawing power is what makes him so important to the UFC. And again, I think they should really look at booking that Conor fight, being that Conor's kind of floating out there in the ether too. Conor wanted to fight 3 times this year. Now, the way it's going, he'll be lucky to fight twice. The Khabib Justin Gaethje fight is still booked for September, but with Khabib's father dying, will that actually happen? Will it get pushed to October, November, December? Who knows? Does Conor want to be on the sidelines the whole time? We'll see. But me personally, as a fan, that's what I would love to see. Hopefully, they can get it done. Co-main event had a shit ton of controversy. I, like the majority of you, scored it 3 rounds to 2 for Max. I had it 48-47. This fight was by no means a robbery. I know there's a lot of people throwing that term around. It was not a robbery. If you actually look at the punch stats at the end of the fight, if you go on Fight Metric, you'll actually see that Alex landed 9 more shots in the third round than Max, even though most people felt that Max won that round. And overall, for the course of the fight, I wrote it down here, Alex landed 35 more strikes than Max. So, what you see with your eyes isn't always what, what becomes fact on paper. Again, I had it 3 rounds to 2 for Max. I just don't think that Max definitively won that third round. You could say he won rounds 1 and 2 easily. He did. You could say Alex won 4 and 5 for sure. That third round really was a bit of a toss-up. I, with the majority of you, gave it to Max, but at the same time, I could see how judges can give it to Alex. It's not a robbery whatsoever. The better question now is where do both go? Where do both guys go? I was thinking that if Max lost, he might go up to lightweight, and I didn't love that move for him when you consider all the the tough opponents up there. He's lost to Poirier. You got Ferguson and Gaethje and Khabib and Charles Oliveira and Dan Hooker and all these monsters. I don't love Max up there, but assuming he lost that fight, I thought that's where he'd go. But losing the way in which he did, where a lot of people scored the fight in his favor, including Dana White, who was really critical of the judges after the fight, I think he's going to hang around at featherweight. And I think if I'm him, I kind of see how the landscape at 145 pounds plays out. They've been trying to book Brian Ortega and Korean Zombie for the better part of a year now. Still hasn't happened. You've got Yair and Zabit, which is supposed to be going down late August, but not official. So the winner of either of those 2 fights could potentially take on someone like Alex, and Max could always fight the loser. But there is an outside chance, and it's rare, but it could happen in this circumstance, where Max is automatically given a third chance. We've seen it happen before when Dana thinks that a fighter was wronged, he'll kind of, pull the card and make things right. You saw with Jose Aldo getting the title fight against Piotr Jan, that we'll talk about later. So who knows? He might look to book a trilogy fight even later this year, November, December, just to kind of like put a nail in the coffin. The tricky part will be if Max wins a close decision, do you give another shot back to Alex and then just ping pong back off each other? Who knows? But featherweight right now, besides Max, doesn't have a number 1 guy. Everyone there is kind of already slated to fight different opponents. And even you got Calvin Kattar fighting this Wednesday. Same deal. You know what I mean? He gets a big win. Maybe he jumps into the top 5, although he's fighting a guy who's ranked outside the top 10, I believe. I mean, it's just another fighter to throw into that pile of like super talented featherweights without there being a number 1 contender. So I think that situation is going to remain unresolved for a little while. I do believe that Max will get another title shot, but in all likelihood, he'll probably have to win a fight or 2 against some of these guys that are tied up with opponents at the time being. But I thought it was a much better performance from Max than I saw in the first fight. And if you believe what he said, meaning that he didn't have any training partners, he was doing all his training on Zoom, I thought that was a really impressive performance. I had picked Alex to win by decision, but I thought it would be much more clear-cut. And, kudos to Max for putting on a great fight. The third title fight on the card, Piotr Jan and Jose Aldo, for the first 2.5 rounds was really competitive. I love that Jose Aldo broke out the leg kicks again. We haven't seen consistent leg kicks from him for years. Since his early featherweight run in the UFC, and to see him put it on Piotr Jan early, causing Jan to switch stance a couple times. I really really liked that Aldo was kind of getting back to basics, and I thought that his body work was great. Those left hooks that he was landing to the body were just brutal. But ultimately, he did run out of gas a little bit. Jan pushes a pretty good pace, and Jan doesn't let you rest in it. And the commentators mentioned it a couple times, like he's just mean. He's just mean. So as soon as he smells blood, he's all over you. And again, although it was competitive, 2 rounds, the third round was still competitive, but in the fourth round, you started to see him fade, and Jan started to pick it up, and he really started picking apart Aldo with his boxing. Jan's boxing is just phenomenal. It may not be underrated anymore, but I think it was underrated coming into this fight and even his last fight. But he showed that he is a UFC caliber, fighter. He's a UFC caliber champion. I'm really curious to see the fight with Sterling. I know Dana White's kind of a little hesitant on making it official, but I don't know what else they would do at this point, unless they wanted to entertain Henry Cejudo coming back, but he just gave up the belt, so it's like, what's the point? So I'm really looking forward to the Jan Sterling fight. Real big clash of styles. Sterling obviously has phenomenal grappling, very tall and long for the weight class, and I like how his striking's improved. A lot of front kicks, a lot of John Jones in the way that he strikes. He's really understood how to utilize his length, and Jan isn't the largest bantamweight out there, but Jan can take a shot. Jan can definitely return fire. And in terms of his striking arsenal, he doesn't have much in the way of weaknesses. He's strong everywhere. But, how he'll deal with the grappling of Aljamain Sterling remains to be seen. That part is going to be where it gets a little bit dicey for me, because Sterling's grappling is really, really next level for that weight class. You saw him take out Corey Sandhagen with no problems, and Sandhagen on the mat is just phenomenal. So I'm really hoping they book that fight. I'm really hoping that they get that maybe towards the end of the year. I think that's a really, really exciting fight. I don't think it'll be the the fireworks that we saw with the Aldo Jan fight, but I think it'll be just as exciting in its own way. As for Jose Aldo, again, I thought it was a good performance from him. His problem throughout, especially these last few years of his career, is when he gets into those late rounds, he has trouble keeping up that pace because, everything is, a lot of his striking is very swinging from the fences. You saw him with those left body hooks, he's throwing his whole body in there and he's just turning it over. And with the leg kicks, it's like that big whip. And so when it lands, it has a lot of impact. But 3, 4, 5 rounds of that, at his age, it starts to kind of slow down a little bit. I think a good fight for him in the weight class would be Dominic Cruz. Both older, both former champions that haven't crossed paths yet. I think this would be a really opportune time for the UFC to put this fight together. It makes a lot of sense. I think both guys would want that fight. I think it means something for each of their legacies, each of their careers. And, even though Dominic Cruz maybe, who knows what the rankings will look like now, but let's say he's 4 spots behind Aldo, a win over Cruz is still a win over Cruz, right? It's no joke. And same thing for Cruz. A win over Aldo is still a win over Aldo. So it's still an important fight to make. But it's for 2 of the older guys in the division. It kind of keeps them off to the side so that the UFC can focus on the younger generation of bantamweights, like I already mentioned, with Sterling, Jan, Sandhagen, et cetera, et cetera. You got a lot of talent down there. Cody Garbrandt, and then you got TJ Dillashaw that's going to return next year. So, that division's going to get real stacked real fast. For me, though, the Aldo Cruz fight is the one to make. If you go below the 3 title fights, you had the rematch between Rose Namajunas and Jessica Andrade. Really went similar to how the first fight went, in that Rose was playing the Matador the entire time. Jessica was kind of storming her, kind of coming in, and Rose would kind of hit her with a shot, move out of the way, hit her again. Her footwork, her timing, her boxing is so crisp. Even when they got into clinch positions, the fact that Rose was able to kind of get out of them and often land on the exit, I thought was really impressive. Andrade is fucking monster, built like a tractor. We saw what happened in the first fight. So my fear was, for Rose at least, was that if they did get into these close exchanges and ended up in the clinch, would Andrade be able to kind of ragdoll her, pick her up, take her down, that kind of stuff. And I was just shocked that Rose was able to kind of escape those positions really with no problems whatsoever. Obviously, in the third round, Jessica put it on Rose and really, really went to work. If this was a 5-round fight, that would have been real interesting. Would that eye have survived, 2 more rounds? I'm not too sure about that. That eye was really, really swollen. She had that big gash on her nose. And, she was really starting to get hurt by some of these shots by Andrade. Rose won the fight. I didn't get the whole split decision thing. I thought Rose won the first 2 rounds convincingly. And obviously Andrade won the last round. Not enough to be a 10-8 in my opinion. But, I mean, if that round was another minute longer and she could have kept putting it on Rose, you could have been talking about a potential draw. But, that's in another world. So Rose wins the fight. You figure they have to do the Weili Zhang fight. There's really no other fight to make. Weili has mentioned before that she thought that Rose was the top girl in the division. And it seems like she's really wanted to fight her since she beat Andrade for the title last year. And Rose had that, year off, kind of healing up after the Andrade loss. And, obviously she's got the issue with her eye and her nose now, but, I'm hoping the UFC can try and book that maybe for late in the year, November, December. And I'm curious to see how it plays out. The only thing that worries me again for Rose is that Weili just ran right through Jessica Andrade when they fought in Asia last year. And obviously, Rose has had 2 fights with Andrade, one that she's lost obviously by the slam, and the second one she's won. But in both fights she's taken pretty good damage, and you have to wonder, does Rose pack enough punch to keep Andrade off of her? To keep Weili Zhang off of her. If she wasn't able to do it with Jessica Andrade, can she do it with Weili Zhang? That's kind of where things get a little bit dicey. If she can't keep Weili off of her, and Weili kind of is coming forward without a ton of respect for Rose's power, it could be a long night for Rose. I think Rose is going to have to really switch things up. She's going to have to give Weili a lot of different looks. I don't think she's going to be able to go in there like she did with the 2 Andrade fights and expect that same outcome. I think she's going to have to take it to Weili a little bit and not allow herself to be the matador for as many as 5 rounds. It's just we've seen what's happened with other opponents that have done that with Weili, and it hasn't worked out well for them, and I don't think it would work out well for Rose either. But that being said, it is absolutely the fight to make it strawweight. I think it would be as exciting as the Joanna Weili Zhang fight. A ton of potential there, so I'm really hoping the UFC can try and find a way to make that work. As soon as Rose is healed up and ready to go. That kind of takes us to the opener on the fight card, which was the Paige Van Zandt Amanda Ribas fight. And I mean, as Max Holloway says, it is what it is. Ribas was expected to win the fight. I saw her as much as a 10-1 favorite on some betting sites. The UFC booked this fight for a reason. They booked this fight because they wanted to promote Ribas. As mentioned during the broadcast, a black belt in judo and jiu-jitsu, and her striking is a lot better than people give her credit for. They really want to help build her name by having her beat a known commodity in Paige Van Zandt. And you could say, well, Paige isn't a top tier fighter, and I'd say that's true, but the popularity is still there. If you beat Paige, there's probably still a lot of eyes on you beating Paige, which in essence just moves you up. The second reason is that Paige herself was on the last fight of her contract, and she's made it known that she believes that she's underpaid. She says that she's made more money on the side than all of her UFC fights combined. I think she was talking about her appearances on Dancing with the Stars. She basically was letting it be known that she was looking for a pay raise, and she also let it be known that this was going to be the most important fight of her life. Little did she know that she was kind of getting set up to fail, if we're being honest. And I have nothing against Paige. I actually think that Paige is a better fighter than people give her credit for. I think she's extremely scrappy. She broke her arm in the Jessica Rose Clark fight, I believe it was. She's got bloodied up in the Rose Namajunas fight, but she's never one to give up. And I mean, you saw her fight that armbar, Famibes, for, a good 30 seconds or so. I mean, she did everything she could to get out of there. It's just, Hebus is on a bit of a different level. Following the fight, Hebus was talking about potentially going back down to strawweight. She mentioned Marina Rodriguez as an opponent. I personally would much rather her stay at flyweight. It's a much shorter road to title contention there. If you go down to strawweight, you've got all these monsters at the top of the heap. The Roses, the Andrades, the Wiley Zhangs, the Tatiana Suarez, assuming she ever gets healthy and fights. I mean, you just got a ton of people to go through. At flyweight, you don't have that, right? In theory, if she put on 2 really, really big performances at flyweight, I think she could be a title contender. I think she can be a title contender by next year, assuming she beats a top 10 and, let's say, a top 5 fighter. So I would hope that she would stay at 125 pounds, but we'll see. Either way, I think it's known now the UFC has another player there in the women's division. Whether or not they decide to keep her at flyweight or drop her back down to strawweight remains to be seen. But another exciting female fighter to watch. For Paige, win or lose, I assume this would have been her last fight with the UFC. But coming off the loss, and if you guys saw what Dana White was saying in the post-fight scrum, he was kind of just twisting it in a little bit, saying, talked a lot of game and not getting paid, and then you came out and had this performance, and maybe you should check out free agency. I mean, that's basically doing everything short of saying, like, here's the door, show your way out. So when you look at the potential suitors out there, you got to figure Bellator is at the top of the list. Her husband fights there, Austin Vanderford. When you look at a guy like Scott Coker, he's done a great job in making his fighters stars, even if they're not the cream of the crop. He has a really great way of developing them. He can bring Paige up slowly if he wants. In the UFC, you can't really do that. There are no real easy fights. In Bellator, he can try and match her up against a couple women that she'd be more on par with, try and build the name a little bit. I mean, you've seen him do it with, Ed Ruth and Dylan Dennis and, a lot of other people. So I think that the structure in Bellator is much better for Paige. She'll be able to keep her sponsors walking to the ring, which will put a lot more money in her pocket, which obviously she's mentioned is very important for her. So I think it's a perfect match. I expect her to move to Bellator with the quickness. I would anticipate if she's still a free agent a month from now, I'd be surprised. I expect her to be with Bellator in 2 to 3 weeks, 2, 3, 4 weeks tops. And whatever Bellator offers, I don't think the UFC is going to match anyway. I think that, it's just best for both parties to split. I think Paige will have more success at Bellator. And, I think the UFC kind of did the Paige Van Zandt experiment. And, at this point, it is what it is. She's proven to be a good fighter, but not someone that's going to be a top 10 title challenger that they were hoping that she would be. So those were kind of my thoughts on the fights. Would gladly hear what you guys thought of it. I was there from the beginning, 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time till about 1:35, 1:45 in the morning or so. Long card, but overall, I'd give it a B minus maybe. Most of the fights delivered, especially on the pay-per-view portion. Obviously, the headliner wasn't what we hoped it would be, but we live and we learn, and we got 2 more cards this week. So thanks everyone for stopping in and watching. Again, if you have any thoughts, drop them in the comments below. That being said, again, this is Joe Devlin, MMA Fight Night Live. Thanks again. Have a great day, everyone.